Welcome, the anointed ones. When God hides you, it's not protection. It's preparation for an explosion your enemies won't survive. Let that marinate. Now imagine this. Every 13 seconds, someone around the world becomes a target of a covert spiritual plot, not because they did something wrong, but because their light did something right. And chosen one, you were one of them. You weren't just being hated. You were being hunted. This wasn't petty jealousy or family drama. Nah, this was spiritual warfare disguised as dinner table gossip, betrayal dressed up as romantic interest, and sabotage wearing your cousin's perfume. You didn't just dodge a bullet. God made sure the sniper's gun jammed. And let's be real, if God hadn't stepped in, you wouldn't be watching this video right now. You'd be on some dusty YouTube conspiracy documentary as the mysterious disappearance that no one could explain. But guess what? You're still here, still breathing, still glowing like a divine glitch in hell's matrix. So grab your seat, because what you're about to hear isn't just tea. It's spiritual intel on the disgusting, wicked plot that was crafted to erase you, and why heaven said, not this one. And don't worry, I'll expose the snakes without naming names, unless the shoe fits. Let's get into it. Number 1. You were never the target. Your light was. They never truly hated you. What they hated was the light that lived inside you. That divine spark, that inner clarity, that unexplainable strength you carried even when life hit you hard. That's what made you a threat. These people couldn't even explain it themselves. They just felt an urge to control, sabotage, and belittle you. But deep down they knew. You carried something rare, something they couldn't copy, couldn't buy, and definitely couldn't kill. From the start, you walked into rooms and shifted the atmosphere without even trying. That wasn't ego, that was energy, and they felt it. You didn't need a title, a platform, or a crowd. Your presence alone exposed what was fake around you. And when people are living in lies, the truth is not welcome, it's dangerous. That's why you were always misunderstood, targeted, and talked about behind your back. It wasn't because you were loud or disrespectful. It was because your spirit revealed things they wanted to keep hidden. They smiled at you, but behind closed doors, they studied you like a threat report. You thought you were building friendships. They were building strategies. You thought they wanted to grow with you. They were secretly trying to bury you. But again, it wasn't personal in the way you think. It was spiritual. These people were reacting to your anointing, and many of them didn't even realize it. Their spirit recognized yours and panicked. You didn't come into their lives to compete. You came to transform. But transformation requires truth, and truth exposes what's broken. So rather than deal with their own shadows, they tried to dim your light. And here's the wild part. You still tried to love them through it. You gave them grace. You held space. But no matter how kind or loyal you were, they kept targeting you, not because you did anything wrong, but because your very existence challenged their comfort zones. The attacks weren't proof you were weak. They were confirmation you were real. You were the mirror that didn't lie. And when people can't handle their own reflection, they try to break the mirror. But no matter how hard they tried, God didn't let them shatter you. Because He knew you weren't the problem. You were the prophecy. Number 2, they didn't just want to hurt you. They wanted to reprogram you. They didn't just want to hurt you. That would have been too easy. What they really wanted was to reprogram you. Break your spirit, twist your mind, make you second-guess yourself so much that you'd start walking around with your head down, questioning your worth, your memories, your voice, even your reality. This wasn't just about emotional damage. This was a full-blown attempt to erase who you were at the core and replace you with something easier to control. That's why their tactics weren't always loud or violent. Sometimes they were subtle, calculated. One day it was a sarcastic comment. The next day, passive-aggressive silence. Then came the guilt trips, the emotional withdrawal, the gaslighting. They wanted to rewrite your internal code by making you think you were the problem. That's how deep it went. If they could get you to distrust your own thoughts, then they'd never have to lift a finger to silence your voice. You'd silence yourself. They knew you had insight, power, and purpose, but instead of supporting it, they tried to drown it. Because if you ever fully stepped into who you were created to be, they'd be exposed for who they weren't. So they chipped away at you, one comment, one manipulation, one betrayal at a time. Not enough to raise suspicion, but just enough to make you feel off. Just enough to shake your foundation. They wanted to turn you into a shell of yourself, obedient, exhausted, confused, and small. And yet, through all of that, you kept waking up. You kept questioning, kept fighting. Even in moments where you didn't have the language to explain what was happening, your spirit knew. And that's what saved you. God stepped in because he saw they weren't just harming you. They were trying to reconstruct you into their image. And he said no. He protected your mind from permanent damage, because once someone loses their identity, they become a puppet. And that's exactly what the enemy wanted, a powerful soul with no sense of self. But God preserved your wiring. Every part they tried to twist, he realigned. You didn't just survive abuse. You escaped a dark system that wanted to overwrite your destiny. That's the kind of miracle people overlook. But heaven recorded it. Number 3. Your death would have been ritual, not tragic. They weren't just trying to hurt you. They were planning to make your downfall a spectacle. This wasn't some emotional outburst or random act of cruelty. No, they wanted your destruction to be seen, talked about, and used as proof that you were never who you said you were. They wanted you to break down publicly so they could stand back and say, "See? Told you they weren't special." Your pain wasn't just going to be their satisfaction. It was going to be their validation. This was never meant to be a quiet fall. They wanted a dramatic crash. They wanted you mentally destroyed, emotionally bankrupt, spiritually disconnected, and preferably in some messy situation that would have gone viral in your circle. It was planned. Some of them wanted to push you into isolation, then blame you for being distant. They wanted to drive you to depression, then call you unstable. Some were even hoping you'd lose everything, your peace, your name, your reputation, so they could feel superior standing over your wreckage. What they didn't expect was for God to intercept the whole performance. They had their stage ready, their lines rehearsed, their fake concern prepared. But heaven shut the whole operation down. You didn't fall the way they planned. And even when you stumbled, it didn't look like defeat. It looked like transformation. The same breakdown they were waiting for turned into a breakthrough that none of them saw coming. They were counting on the version of you that didn't know who you were. The version that still sought approval, still craved love, still gave chances to people who only gave you pain. But what they missed was that pain built a new version of you, one they couldn't manipulate or control. God didn't just rescue you from them, he rescued you from needing them. If they had succeeded, your name would have been whispered with pity and disgust. But God flipped the script. Now you're the one rising, quietly, powerfully. And every time they see you still standing, still glowing, still chosen, they feel it. Because they know deep down, your destruction wasn't denied for no reason. It was delayed so your elevation could be witnessed by the same ones who planned your funeral. Number 4, they recruited people to be your handlers, not friends. Some of the people you thought were your closest allies were never sent to love you. They were sent to monitor you. Some came into your life looking like friends, partners, even family. But they were really playing roles. Roles designed to control, distract, and keep you off your path. They weren't sent by God. They were strategically positioned by something darker, something that recognized your potential before even you did. These people didn't come to build with you. They came to study you. They paid attention to your routines, your patterns, your weaknesses. They took mental notes when you were vulnerable. They watched how you handled stress, who you confided in, how you processed pain. They listened, not to support you, but to gather intel. Every time you tried to open up, they twisted your words later. Every time you let them in, they subtly reminded you not to aim too high, not to dream too loud, not to believe in yourself too much. It was psychological warfare in slow motion. And the most dangerous part? You trusted them. That's what made it work for so long. They gained your confidence so they could keep tabs on your growth. Anytime you tried to level up, they'd pull you back with guilt, with drama, with distractions, with fake support that always came with strings attached. You weren't just being gaslit. You were being managed. But what they didn't see coming was your soul waking up. Even though they tried to clip your wings, your spirit kept slipping out of the cage. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped shrinking. You started questioning the patterns. And that's when their behavior started glitching. They couldn't keep you in the mental loop anymore. You became too conscious to be manipulated, too aligned to be played. That's when their real purpose started to show. Some left suddenly, some turned cold, some lashed out. Because once a handler realizes you're no longer under their spell, they panic. Their power only works when you don't know you have your own. But now you do. And that terrifies them. Because it means you're no longer surrounded by allies in disguise. You're surrounded by exposed ghosts of a system that failed to break you. Number 5. The plot was multi-generational. You were the first to break the curse. This fight didn't start with you, it landed on you. What you've been dealing with wasn't just a string of bad luck or random hardship. This was a deeply rooted generational agenda. A cycle of dysfunction, secrecy, trauma, and spiritual bondage that's been running through your bloodline like a silent disease. And you were the first one who didn't look away, the first one who questioned it, the first one who said, "This ends with me." You didn't just break habits. You shattered centuries of programming. You called out the lies your family made normal. You questioned the behavior that was always swept under the rug. You faced the abuse that others denied. You spoke the truth that your ancestors were too afraid to say, and that made you dangerous, not just to people but to principalities. Because let's be real, this wasn't just about you being emotionally strong. This was spiritual warfare. They came at you so hard because your awakening was an act of spiritual rebellion. You weren't supposed to wake up. You weren't supposed to find your voice. You were supposed to follow the same patterns, repeat the same pain, raise the next generation in the same silent trauma. But you didn't. You chose clarity over comfort, healing over hiding, purpose over pretending. That decision broke something ancient. That's why it felt like everything in your life went into chaos the moment you started healing. That's why people turned on you. That's why the pressure became unbearable. You weren't just changing your life. You were disrupting a spiritual economy that fed off your family's dysfunction. When you stopped playing the role they expected of you, the whole system started crumbling. You weren't a threat. You were a code breaker. Your existence threatened their structure. Your clarity dismantled their confusion. And the moment you decided to walk in truth, you pulled the plug on a darkness that had gone unchecked for generations. That's why it felt like war. Because it was one. But you didn't just survive it, you won. Quietly, boldly. And now the curse is broken, and the legacy is brand new. Number 6. God let you see the ugly, so you'd never romanticize evil again. God didn't sugarcoat the process for you. He didn't wrap it in soft lessons or polite warnings. He let you see the ugliness of evil up close because anything less wouldn't have broken the spell. You didn't just get hurt, you got initiated into reality. The mask was ripped off, and for the first time you saw how calculated, cold, and unapologetic darkness can be. It didn't just knock on your door, it sat at your table, smiled in your face, and stabbed you with the knife you handed it. You had to feel the weight of betrayal in your bones. You had to sit in rooms where love was fake, but manipulation was real. You had to trust people who used that trust as currency to sabotage you later. That level of pain wasn't punishment, it was clarity. God let it happen not because he abandoned you, but because he knew one day your discernment would be someone else's lifeline. He let you walk through the fire because he knew that if you didn't see how evil truly operates, you'd always be vulnerable to it dressed up as charm, charisma, or good intentions. You had to feel the bite of betrayal, not just for revenge or lessons, but to train your spirit. Because the truth is, many of the most dangerous people in your life didn't come with warning signs. They came with compliments. Now you no longer mistake attention for affection. You no longer confuse access with loyalty. You've learned to read energy, not just words. You've stopped explaining away red flags because you've lived what happens when you ignore them. You don't romanticize toxicity anymore because you've bled from it. This kind of awakening doesn't come from books or sermons. It comes from walking through hell with your eyes wide open. And that's what God allowed, not to break you, but to build a spiritual immune system that no manipulation can ever penetrate again. You're not naive anymore. You're dangerous now, in the best way. Because once you've seen the devil without his mask, he can never seduce you again. Number 7. Your silence wasn't ignored. It was weaponized in the spirit. Your silence wasn't weakness, it wasn't defeat, it wasn't confusion. It was a divine strategy. While they whispered, plotted, and performed, you went quiet, not because you had nothing to say, but because God pulled you into a sacred season where words would have wasted your energy. They thought your quiet meant they'd won, that you were broken, that you'd finally accepted whatever small box they shoved you into. But what they didn't know is that God was building something atomic inside of you. You weren't inactive, you were in a spiritual lab. In silence, you were shedding false identities, cutting soul ties, unlearning generational lies, and downloading divine instruction. It looked like stillness to the outside world, but inside, it was a full-blown war room. You were being rewired. Your discernment was leveling up. Your spirit was being trained to hear frequencies that can't be detected by human ears. That's why your silence was misunderstood. It wasn't quiet. It was sacred noise in the spirit realm. They kept pushing, kept provoking, trying to get a reaction. They wanted to drag you into drama, force you to defend yourself, bait you into breakdowns. But your silence frustrated them. It was like spiritual static, proof that their tactics were no longer effective. And that silence? It became a weapon. Every day you didn't respond, didn't fold, didn't explain, power was building. You were being loaded like a spiritual missile. They mistook your pause for paralysis. They thought you were out of moves, but they failed to realize you weren't in checkmate. You were in preparation. And now, that comeback they never saw coming is already in motion. The glow up, the clarity, the authority in your voice, the doors opening without their permission. It's all happening now, and it's blinding them. Because when God decides to relaunch someone who's been through the fire in silence, the explosion isn't just loud, it's unstoppable. So let them keep wondering how you did it. You won't have to explain. Your elevation will be the loudest response they'll ever hear. Number 8. They tried to transfer their karma onto you. This wasn't just manipulation, it was spiritual fraud at its most twisted. They knew exactly what they had done, the betrayal, the lies, the generational curses they refused to heal. And instead of taking responsibility, they tried to pin it on you. They wanted to be seen as the victim while secretly playing the villain. So they twisted narratives, exaggerated your flaws, played innocent in public, and silently hoped that you'd absorb the blowback from their karma. This was a covert attempt to hijack spiritual law. They thought if they projected their guilt onto you long enough, through shame, gossip, blame, or emotional abuse, then maybe heaven would believe the illusion and deal with you instead of them. It wasn't just toxic. It was calculated. They knew they were guilty. They knew they were the ones causing chaos. But because you had a pure heart and an open spirit, they used your light as a scapegoat, hoping it would take the hit for their darkness. What they didn't count on was divine discernment. God doesn't get fooled by theatrics. He doesn't judge based on who talks the most, cries the loudest, or pretends to be the nice one. God read the energy signature. He traced the pain back to its original source. And when the truth finally hit the atmosphere, it caused a spiritual reversal so violent that even they couldn't escape it. Now everything they tried to dump onto you is circling back with precision, not because you wished harm, but because divine justice does not miss. The tears they mocked, the confusion they triggered, the isolation they designed, it's all coming home to them. And not quietly, publicly. The very stories they told about you are unraveling in front of the same people they tried to deceive. The traps they set are closing in, and they're stuck. God protected you not just from the attack, but from a false identity they tried to plant on your soul. He kept your name clean in places your voice was never heard. And now you walk free, not just from them, but from the spiritual punishment they tried to hand you. That's not luck. That's divine reversal. Number 9. You were supposed to self-destruct publicly. They bet on it. They weren't just waiting for your failure, they were engineering it. Some of them watched you with the same energy a crowd watches a building about to collapse. They didn't just want you gone. They wanted your destruction to be spectacular. They were counting on your breakdown to happen where everyone could see it. They wanted your pain to be permanent and most of all public. Arrested, hospitalized, caught in a scandal, wandering the streets, spiraling online. They had visions of your downfall going viral. That's why they pushed you so hard. Why they whispered lies behind your back, stirred up chaos around your name, and poked at your most sensitive wounds. It wasn't random cruelty. It was a staged performance, and you were the main character they hoped would crash and burn. They thought if they could manipulate just enough pressure, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, you'd finally snap. And when you did, they'd sit back, sip their bitterness, and say, "See, told you they weren't stable." But God disrupted the whole production. He didn't just protect your mind, He dismantled the narrative. The scenes they wrote never made it to reality. The false charges never stuck. The breakdown never happened. The public embarrassment never came. The crowd they gathered to witness your failure saw nothing. Because heaven blurred the cameras and deleted the script. You didn't break down, you broke out. While they were watching, you were healing. While they were betting on your fall, you were getting instructions. God kept your moves hidden, your pain sacred, and your deliverance quiet, until it was time to reappear, stronger than they ever imagined. You didn't just survive what they threw at you, you escaped a destruction that was custom designed for your soul. And now, you're the plot twist. Your very existence exposes their lies. The same mouth that said you wouldn't make it now has to choke on the truth. You didn't just win. You escaped the fall they needed to validate their hatred. That's divine sabotage. That's why you're still standing. Number 10. You were never the black sheep. You were the bloodline disruptor. They called you the black sheep like it was your flaw, like you were defective, like something was wrong with you because you didn't fit in with their dysfunction. But the truth is, you were never the problem. You were the proof that there was a problem. You saw through the silence, the secrets, the double standards. You asked the questions no one dared to. You broke the rules that were never right to begin with. And because of that, they labeled you. They couldn't control you, so they cast you out. They couldn't shame you into submission, so they made you the scapegoat. In families, churches, jobs, and social circles, you were often the one excluded, misunderstood, and misrepresented. But it wasn't rejection. It was divine separation. God pulled you out of systems that would have swallowed you whole, not because He was punishing you, but because He was preserving you. You were the one called to break the pattern, the one who saw through the spiritual fog. While others repeated the same generational cycles, abuse, denial, manipulation, spiritual compromise, you were over here disrupting it all just by being honest. They didn't hate you because you were wrong. They hated you because you were right, and they weren't ready to face that. God didn't allow you to blend in because you were never meant to. You're not a match for the lies your bloodline normalized. You were never meant to become another echo in a room full of generational silence. You were called to be the rupture, the recalibration, the restart. That's why the attacks were so personal, so persistent, and so painful, because spiritual systems protect their cycles, and your very existence threatened the blueprint. You weren't the black sheep. You were the exit strategy. And now that you've stopped apologizing for being different, God is revealing just how necessary your presence really was. You didn't betray them. You saved the future from becoming a carbon copy of the past. And because of that, every curse they tried to keep alive with your silence is now collapsing under the weight of your truth. Number 11. The plot was legal in the spirit, until you gained consciousness. This wasn't just a streak of bad luck or family drama. What was happening to you had spiritual paperwork behind it. Generational contracts, some spoken, others unspoken, were signed long before you arrived. Agreements were made in silence, in trauma, in rituals, in denial. Abuse was tolerated. Betrayal was excused. Abandonment was normalized. And because no one challenged it, it became legally binding in the spirit. It was as if darkness had a deed to your bloodline, and no one questioned who held the title until you. You started asking the questions no one dared to ask. You started telling the truth everyone swore to protect. You called out dysfunction that others called tradition. And without knowing it, your awakening started a legal disruption in the spiritual realm. Because in the court of heaven, consciousness matters. The moment you aligned with divine truth, when you said no more, even through tears, you voided the generational terms the enemy had been operating under for centuries. The enemy had legal access to torment your family because everyone before you stayed in agreement with the lie. They tolerated it, survived it, passed it on. But when you broke the silence, when you refused to carry what wasn't yours, something ancient snapped. That's when all hell broke loose. Not because you were weak, but because you were right. Your spirit revoked what your bloodline had accepted. You rejected the cycle, and in doing so, you stripped the enemy of his permission. Now the same traps that worked on your parents, your grandparents, your siblings don't work on you. The manipulation doesn't land, the shame doesn't stick, the generational heaviness begins to lift, not because you're better, but because you're awake. That's why the pressure intensified the moment you started healing. Because you weren't just shifting your life, you were rewriting the spiritual contract. You took the pen from the enemy and handed it back to God. And now every curse, every lie, every toxic agreement that ruled your bloodline is being reversed. The enemy no longer has legal grounds. You're not just free. You've legally evicted darkness from your lineage. Number 12. Your pain wasn't a side effect. It was a proof of purpose. Your pain wasn't some random consequence or background noise. It was central to your calling. Every betrayal, every loss, every breakdown was part of the architecture. The people who tried to destroy you thought they were inflicting permanent damage. But they had no idea that pain, in the hands of God, becomes a blueprint. The pressure they thought would crush you ended up carving out the depth and dimension of your purpose. They weren't just hurting you, they were unknowingly participating in your spiritual construction. See, when you're chosen, God doesn't build your life on comfort, He builds it on truth. And nothing reveals truth like pain. It exposes false attachments, it surfaces hidden lies, it teaches discernment in a way no book ever could. Pain became your training ground, not your tomb. You learned how to spot manipulation, how to hear God through the noise, how to sit still in storms that were meant to knock you out. That's not a side effect, that's spiritual formation. They tried to weaponize your trauma, your grief, your isolation. They assumed if they could throw enough at you, eventually you'd shatter and stay shattered. But all they did was supply the raw materials God needed to fortify you. What they saw as your weakness has now become your sharpest wisdom. What they laughed at has become your language for reaching others. What they tried to silence is now the thunder behind your voice. They thought pain would paralyze your purpose. Instead, it activated it. You didn't just walk through fire. You learned how to carry it. You now speak with an authority born from experience. And when you open your mouth, it doesn't just echo, it delivers. That's what scares them now. The very tools they use to bury you are in your hands, sharpened into divine weapons. Your scars aren't just reminders, they're credentials. They prove that your purpose wasn't handed to you, it was forged. And because of that, you don't just carry knowledge, you carry spiritual firepower. You were never the victim, you were the vessel, and now the pain they tried to use against you is preaching louder than any lie they've ever told. Number 13. They were feeding on your energy while pretending to love you. They weren't loving you, they were feeding on you. You were the power source, the warmth, the emotional generator that kept everything around you lit. You carried light into dark rooms, clarity into confusion, and healing into broken dynamics. But what you thought was mutual connection was actually a one-way siphon. They weren't pouring into you, they were draining you. They applauded your strength when it served their weakness. They complimented your joy when they needed a refill. They leaned on your wisdom, borrowed your peace, and soaked up your calm, but never once asked how you were really doing. And when you started to dim, they didn't rush to restore you. They scattered to find someone else to leech from. It was a parasitic exchange disguised as affection. They called it love, but it came with conditions. Perform, serve, save, and don't ask for too much. You were expected to stay available, emotionally generous, spiritually present, even while dying inside. And the moment you set a boundary or stopped being their emotional generator, they turned cold. That wasn't love. That was dependency on your light. God saw it. He watched how they positioned themselves close enough to benefit, but far enough to avoid accountability. He saw how they smiled in your face while draining your spirit behind the scenes. And he stepped in. Not just to protect you, but to cut their access to your essence. He pulled you back, closed the spiritual ports they were feeding through, and revealed the ugly truth. They were never in love with you. They were addicted to your energy. Now they're starving, not just emotionally, but spiritually, because your light wasn't just convenience, it was covering. You were unknowingly shielding them from the consequences of their own spiritual decay. And with you gone, the darkness they kept hidden is devouring them from the inside out. That's why they're restless. That's why they're angry. That's why they're suddenly remembering your worth. Not because they've changed, but because they're hungry for what you no longer offer. But God has sealed the vault. You're no longer accessible to parasites. You're protected, and they're exposed. Number 14. What God saved you from was nothing compared to what He's saving you for. You thought the miracle was that you survived, but that was only the first draft of the story. What God pulled you out of was brutal, no doubt. The betrayal, the spiritual warfare, the near implosion of your mind and identity, yes, it was intense. But it was never the main plot. That was just the demolition phase. God wasn't just trying to rescue you from the fire. He was preparing a throne in the ashes. You weren't saved just to sit in silence. You were saved to interrupt hell's program. Your survival wasn't the finish line, it was the launch pad. He didn't save you just so you could say, I made it. He saved you so you could become the very proof that darkness never gets the final word. You are not just a healed person, you are a healing agent. Your testimony is not about pity, it's about power. Power to break generational curses, to deliver truth into deceptive systems, and to walk into spaces you were once exiled from with divine authority. God didn't just rescue you, He anointed you. That's why everything had to fall apart. Because the you that existed before the breakdown couldn't carry the glory He was placing on your life now. What looked like punishment was preparation. He had to strip the illusions, reveal the parasites, sever the soul ties, and show you exactly what was not love. So when restoration came, it would be real. No more counterfeits, no more crumbs, no more spiritual charity for people who were draining your destiny. You were never meant to be another almost made it. You're the one who interrupts the forecast. Your comeback is going to look so impossible, so divine, so undeniable, that your enemies won't just be shocked, they'll be humiliated. They spoke on your downfall like it was prophecy, but they forgot God had the final edit. He didn't just save you from something, He saved you for something. And what's coming next will not just heal you, it will honor every tear, every prayer, every lonely season. Your rise is sacred, and nothing will stop it. What God saved you from was vicious, calculated, and centuries in the making. It wasn't just personal, it was spiritual warfare with ancient roots. But what's more stunning than the enemy's cruelty is God's strategy. He didn't just lift you out of the pit, He decoded the whole plot in front of you. He let you walk through betrayal so you'd recognize deception when it smiles. He let you feel the sting of abandonment so you'd stop begging for love that costs your soul. He let you watch the masks fall off, not to traumatize you, but to awaken you. Because this journey was never about survival alone. It was about sovereignty, restoring your divine authority. This wasn't some accident of fate or bad chapter in a family story. You were dropped into a battlefield disguised as a household, a friendship circle, a romance, or a church pew, and while others became casualties of silence and compromise, you were the one who broke protocol. You woke up. You started asking questions. You cried out to God, not with pretty prayers, but with raw, ugly truth. And heaven responded, not just with comfort, but with intervention. Yes, the attacks were ruthless. Yes, they recruited people to play roles in your destruction. Yes, they tried to transfer their karma, steal your energy, sabotage your mind, but they failed. Because the moment you aligned with truth, God flipped the entire system. What was once legal in the spirit lost its authority. What once fed on your light was starved out. What once propped itself up on your silence was shattered by your discernment. Now the tables have turned. You're not just healing, you're dangerous. You're walking with keys that unlock cages others didn't even know they were in. You're carrying revelation, not just for yourself, but for generations. You're the reason certain curses are breaking and can't reboot. And the ones who used to mock you are now confused by how you keep rising when you were supposed to self-destruct. So understand this. You are not the black sheep, the reject, or the tragedy. You are God's counterstrike. You were sent into the middle of darkness, not to blend in, but to interrupt it. Your comeback isn't just personal, it's prophetic. Every scar is a seal. Every loss was leverage. Every tear was a transaction in heaven's courtroom. And now, your rise is inevitable. Your presence is disruptive. And your story is evidence that hell's forecast will always be rewritten by the hand of God. If this message stirred something deep in your spirit, if it confirmed what you've always felt but couldn't put into words, then don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button and become part of a community that sees you, gets you, and walks this path of purpose with clarity and fire. Like this video, if it resonated with your soul, drop a comment below. I want to hear your story, your thoughts, your aha moments, and most importantly, share this with someone who needs to hear the truth about their battle and their breakthrough. You never know who's silently struggling under the weight of a spiritual war they can't name. This could be the message that wakes them up, just like it woke you up. We're not just building a channel. We're building an army of awakened, chosen souls. And trust me, you want to be part of what's coming next. Subscribe, like, comment, and share. Your voice, your energy, and your presence matter here. Let's keep rising together.